Hi, I'm Dan Beckley.
I'm Monty.
Hi, I'm Paul.
Hi, I'm Lara.
And I'm Robert.
Basically, I think with any business, you look at the next stage of its growth and you look for ways to find new opportunities with your consumers.
Diversifying revenue streams for me and our company means not just looking at the normal ways that we sell goods and looking outside the box, so looking at alternative avenues. And I think COVID has gone to show that things can change very, very quickly and you've got to adapt.
So Brickyard primarily is a membership model business, and I think for us there are two ways of looking at diversification. So there's diversifying the membership types that we have. So for us that would be looking at what B2C offering we could create, which is something we are thinking about but that we haven't launched. And then from the other side of our business we have two other revenue streams, which are of course retail revenues and events revenues. So probably for us on the event side, it's about exploring the breadth and scope for what that events portfolio looks like.
In our case, we started with rides, with obviously Uber rides, then we went to Uber Eats, and now we're developing advertising. So yeah, and all of those all link into one thing, which is the consumer and what the consumer does.
Over the last 18 months or so, we have been building out our business in other gifting categories as well. We've learned that our customers love and trust Bloom & Wild for things like great customer service, really easy to use tech, reliable delivery, great curation, but they don't always want to buy a flower gift. And so we've built out other gifting categories like brownies and cookies, scented candles and diffusers, bath and beauty products. And we see that by offering these categories as well, we're playing a more useful role in our customers' lives and catering to more gifting occasions.
We've used multiple different marketplaces to diversify our sales revenue. So we use the likes of The Range, Wayfair, B&Q, Amazon, but just to name a few. We've seen it as a really good way to diversify our revenue and not have to spend a lot on marketing and a lot on things like Google Ads to actually gain customers.
And so for us, it means looking at new geographies, so not just looking at the UK market and being reliant on that. New channels as well, so new sales channels is incredibly important to us. So not just staying on the same channels and always looking at the new companies within industry.
I think for us it's really about focusing on getting the right mix of memberships in place and the right mix of events. And actually, although they are sort of core revenue streams in and of themselves, when you start to think about them and break them down into B2B, B2C, and the different, therefore, types of events that you can do, it's actually quite a broad revenue stream.
I think the challenge is when you're an established business, establishing new revenue streams require commitment from the senior leadership, so that it's clear what the opportunity is. Because you're sort of doing a startup within a big business, and I think that's always it's an interesting challenge. But once you have that commitment, then I think it becomes relatively straightforward in terms of how you build it from there. You're still going to learn along the way, because building a business in any way, whether it's an entrepreneurial business or an intrapreneurial business, is the same. You still have challenges, you still have learnings, and it probably doesn't quite go the way you want it to go in day one.
One of those challenges is operationally, it's very, very different for the team. So if you're going to a completely different revenue stream, you've got to think about how you set that up, and you've also got to change your team's focus. If, for example, you've always sold within the UK market in our industry, selling into the US or into Europe, there's different regulations and standards we have to abide by. So it's a complete different process overhaul that we have to get our heads around, make sure we're compliant.
Yeah, I think challenges of sort of any revenue diversification is making sure that you have the skills in-house to deliver those secondary revenue streams. For example, in this business, if our primary revenue stream is the sort of core membership retail base, secondary could be, for example, our events business, and a very different sort of business with different drivers, and therefore you need different sort of personalities and people within the business to really capitalise on the potential of those revenue streams. So yeah, I think as ever, often comes back to sort of the people that you have in the business and their ability to be able to execute on those additional revenue streams.
Well, I think with any revenue stream, the question is, how do you scale it and how do you develop it? And that's the most important thing.
Start looking at these as soon as you can. You don't want things to get to a point in time where it's too late and you wish you'd acted earlier. It doesn't cost anything to look into researching these revenue streams and think outside of the box and look at what people aren't doing and where the demand is, because the environment in the industry is always changing in online retail, and you need to be a step ahead of everyone else.
One of the main benefits of diversifying revenue streams is minimizing risk. So we've seen multiple issues with our own website, for example, where we've had issues with Google Ads and that's gone down. And if we hadn't have had the other revenue streams, it would have meant that our business would have been in a really critical position. But with those other revenue streams, it means that you can pivot really quickly and put more energy into them. And it also means you've got multiple different opportunities. So going back to the marketplace strategy that we've adopted, each of those different marketplaces are doing their own advertising and their own growth. So having your fingers in many pies enables you to then capitalize on those opportunities when they do start growing.
From my experience, I would always encourage businesses to have a few additional revenue streams. I think you don't know what might be coming, and you always want to be prepared in order to be able to flex or pivot or adapt your business to deal with the market conditions. The last few years have taught us that we have to be agile and ready to move, and those who kind of have feelers out there, I think are more able to basically respond to whatever comes their way. So I'm a big advocate of additional revenue streams.
I think it's highlighted the variety of second revenue streams. That's been the one thing. The other thing is as well, I think we've seen certain companies experimenting, and they've been honest in the report, and it's been quite enlightening by the fact they've actually shown what the challenges are and where they've actually decided some avenues might not necessarily be the right ones for them, and then they've experimented in other areas. So I think that the conclusion might be, give things a go and see which opportunities work.
Fingers crossed, some other people within their own businesses will look at the report, look at maybe what we've done alongside other companies and say, okay, we can do something similar, and it will encourage innovation.
I think the thing about business is you learn from other businesses, so that's what it should be about, and it's great to see all these different companies, all these different styles approaching it and how they approach things. It's great. It's a really good way to do it.
Really thrilled to be part of this report. I think it's a really important topic in e-commerce, and so hopefully I've been able to add something to it by sharing some of our experience in Bloom and Wild.
So to me, being someone who works in secondary revenue companies, it's really, really important to have this report talking about and educating people more around the secondary revenue piece. Although it has grown and we've seen a lot of change in the last 5 years, it really still feels like it's in its infancy, and there's a lot for people to learn and a lot of new ways for people to think about secondary revenue and then action that out. For the wider retail sector, I think it becomes equally as important. When you look at the pressures that are going on at the moment, we've got cost of living, we've got supply chain, we've got a lot of uncertainty out there that's driving businesses, especially retail, to really think about what it is they're doing and how to optimize their businesses. Bringing on board secondary revenue, it can be a very simplistic way of driving really quite profitable new lines, as well as just helping themselves to mitigate against some of those challenges we've got right now.
We've got some fantastic examples of how retailers are generating secondary revenue, and this will certainly help to provide lots of thought-provoking ideas in those business strategy sessions that they'll be holding within their businesses.
It's important for us to be in the conversation and to contribute to what's going on in the industry. So thank you very much.
The economic backdrop is quite tough, and I think retailers are sort of had to look at other opportunities, go beyond the core of what their typical business has been. And I think it's it seems a sensible thing just to see what the opportunities are beyond what they've typically been doing over the years. There's quite a lot of variety taking place in secondary revenues, and also the definition retailers have over what it actually is. Tesco, as one of the big guns, is an interesting example, as it's recently sold its Tesco Bank, which is clearly an additional revenue stream, whereas it's been doubling down on loyalty, and also it's set up a retail media division. So it's looking at advertising across all the channels.
So we've seen a huge change in the last 5 years, driven partly by the pandemic, but also prior to that with people's desire to try and find new revenue streams and just new ways of earning that revenue. The pandemic, though, was really where that sea change came. We saw people really needing to find new ways of earning money, and we all heard words like pivot being used a lot. And what you ended up with, because of that 5 years, is a much larger area of secondary revenue sources and a much more diverse way of thinking about it. Just how differently every one of the retailers we spoke to thought about secondary revenue and what secondary revenue was. So you had some of the stuff that's quite commonplace. So you had media sales, and you also had the idea of subscription. And actually subscription recurred through quite a lot for different retailers. But you also had other ideas around how we can join up A and B together to create something new.
What stood out for me, and what I found surprising in the report, is that we think of secondary revenue as website monetization, web loyalty. However, the companies that were involved in putting this report together view secondary revenue very differently. They see secondary revenue as perhaps extending their own product ranges or international expansion. Whereas I think we at Web Loyalty would probably think of that as more a kind of a business as usual. So I think the sheer breadth of ideas and innovations included in this report are going to enable some very thought-provoking conversations.
I would like to see this as a companion piece to some of the other reports we've done over the years, Beyond the Core 2, and the Constrained Consumer that we did last year. And I see it as a way of really mapping how the retail industry is changing and thinking differently about secondary revenue. How they then use that is looking at the change and looking how there's no real boundaries to what can be done here from a secondary revenue point of view. As long as it fits nicely within the customer section that you have, and you can easily action it, and you can help drive it, that it really shows that there's no end to the possibilities here.